everybody, and welcome back to my channel. First of all, I know I'm gonna get comments about this, so I'm just gonna talk about it. I am not a lady. I cannot manage to keep my nails from breaking off of my body. I look crazy. Someone always mentions something when one of my nails is missing. I think for a while there was a hashtag like find Danielle's nail or something like that. They're gone again, and I use my hands a lot, and so as silly as this may seem, I felt the need to talk about it. But again, before I get into this video, I actually have something pretty exciting to share with you guys. I'm not sure if you are aware of it or not. I know those of you on my Twitter probably are. So Oxygen, the TV network, just this past Saturday started up a new series called The Disappearance of Crystal Rogers. And you guys know we dove deep into that case on this channel. I watched hours upon hours of interview footage from Brooks Hauk and Nick Hauk. I will have the video that I covered Crystal Rogers on up here somewhere. Still haven't figured out which side it's on. So I was there for the first episode last Saturday. It comes on 7/6 Central on the Oxygen TV network. And in the first episode alone, I found out so many details that I didn't know about. Obviously, there will always be that, but it had my jaw on the floor, and I was talking to you guys a little bit about it on Twitter. But anyways, Oxygen got in contact with me and wanted to give you guys a fun little sneak peek into the upcoming episode that airs this Saturday, so the day you are seeing this, at 7/6 Central on Oxygen. And in this episode, they are apparently digging a little bit deeper into Brooks and Nick Hauk. And we all know the theories that I had on my video, so I'm very interested to see this. It is just one massive mystery, and I'm learning so much just from the first episode. I can only imagine what the rest of them will bring. So if you have the chance, don't forget to tune in 7/6 Central and go ahead and watch, and we can all talk about it on Twitter. So now right on to today's case, and this is the case of Rico Harris. And I contemplated covering this because I feel like every other true crime YouTuber has covered it. Like, I was actually shocked at how many people had covered it. But the further I got into the story and the more I watched a few videos, not of anyone on YouTube, but just of people that have covered it on the news, and I think there's a disappeared episode that I watched, I felt like you just didn't get a good enough glimpse into Rico's life and to understand what he might have been thinking and what he might have been going through when he disappeared. I just feel like it's necessary to learn all of the backstory, and it is going to be a long video. It is going to be a lot of information that may seem unimportant, but I feel like to know the answers of what happened and to maybe broaden our minds a little bit and think of different theories, we just have to hear all this information out. Because when I first listened to the disappeared episode and just got little snippets and read a few articles, I was not getting the same impression that I am now knowing the rest of his life story. Rico was born on May 19th, 1977 in Los Angeles, California to Henry and Margaret Harris. Now, Margaret and Henry had Rico as their firstborn son, and they eventually would go on to have 3 more children after Rico, but their family didn't stay together for very long after all that. Henry Harris was a pretty good semi-pro basketball player, and I think he played for somewhere in Idaho, but despite being a star basketball player, he was very, very far from being a star husband or a star father. Now, I've seen all sorts of accusations across the board. This is another issue that I really ran into with this case. Because it was so publicized for people who were into sports, there were a lot of different theories coming in and people making assumptions. There are a lot of discrepancies through almost all of the work that I did, so some of this could possibly be wrong. As I say, always, research yourself and double check anything that I say. Don't take what I say as the end all be all, but I've heard that his father was just not great. I've heard that he was possibly abusive, but he, really focused in on Rico in all of this. And Rico took it very, very hard. Obviously, he was the first son, and then all these siblings come along, and then he's kind of treated badly, the worst out of everybody. It was a blow to him, but despite all of this, he still strongly needed his father's approval and acceptance, and he unfortunately would spend most of his life trying to get it. But despite all of this negativity that his father seemed to bring him, the one positive thing that his father gave him was a massive skill for basketball. And Rico wasn't just kind of talented and good at basketball. Rico was blessed. Like, Rico had amazing basketball skill, naturally talented, you know, beyond just average talent. He had a goal from the age of 5 on to become an NBA player, which is massive. You know, that's like the end goal for someone who loves and is passionate about basketball. But unfortunately, his road to get there would be far from easy. After years of putting up with Henry's behavior, Margaret decided to leave, and she took all 3 of her children and moved to Alhambra in California, and this was where she grew up and where she would finish off raising her children. And while all of this was happening, Rico had to really step up, and his goal of becoming the star basketball player slipped to the back burner because now the most important thing was taking care of himself and his siblings in order for his mom to go and work and provide for them. But he always told his mom that one day he would be able to take care of them and she wouldn't have to struggle anymore, and that basketball would save them. He truly believed if he worked as hard as he knew he could and took the skills and just totally blew them out of the water, that he would be able to provide for his family. He had barely spoken to his father in the years following when his mother and his siblings left, but somehow he was able to use his father's address to attend Temple City High School for his junior year. And it was this year and his senior year that he would really start going with basketball. Rico very quickly would become one of the high school star players and top college prospects. He was 6'9", 215 pounds. Other players would have to double and triple team Rico to even have the slightest chance at getting past him or getting the ball away from him. Rico continued to excel in basketball, and he had a lot of eyes on him, and he thought it would be fairly easy to get into the college that he wanted, or, you know, hopefully end up in the NBA. But while he was excelling at basketball, the one thing that he was not excelling in was school. Rico was incredibly shy, incredibly quiet, and he just did not do well when it came to academics. And then he met one of his high school girlfriends and, you know, made a couple of friends, and they all sat down with him and helped him study, and he started very quickly excelling in academics as well. It finally seemed like his hard work was paying off. He was doing great in basketball, he was doing great in school, and Jim Herrick, who was putting together his dream team for the University of Rhode Island, which included players like Lamar Odom, Jim had been really keeping his eye on Rico, and he had high hopes of signing Rico onto his team. However, despite working so hard, Rico still wasn't making the grades that he needed to, so the chance of playing with Jim seemed long gone. So after graduating high school, Rico decided to go to Arizona State under Proposition 48, which basically allowed him to take freshman classes so that he could regain his eligibility and hopefully play for Rhode Island, because at this point, this seemed like a great place to be. He saw all these talented players on this team, this great coach, and that's what he wanted to do. But as I mentioned before, Rico was incredibly shy, and Rico was very attached to his family. So being so far away from them and, you know, desperately needing that constant push to, you know, keep going, keep excelling, work hard, he started falling down a bad rabbit hole yet again. He wasn't doing well academically, and to make things even more difficult, in March of 1996, Rico ended up being arrested for unlawful imprisonment when him, as well as a few teammates, were accused by 2 females to have forced them to perform sexual acts. Now, this was massive in itself. This was not like Rico. This is not something Rico would do. He had all of these dreams, so everyone was just kind of in this panic. And obviously, if this were true, his chance of playing basketball professionally would be gone. But despite the charges being dropped and the female stories being thrown away because they were all inaccurate and incredibly inconsistent, The university still made Rico sit out, so just having this accusation thrown at him, despite the fact that it was proven to be false, he still couldn't play basketball. At this point, Arizona State didn't seem to be benefiting him anymore. They didn't believe his story. They didn't want to let him play basketball. He was already, doing very badly in all of his classes, which was the only reason he was there to begin with. So he decided to go to LA City College next. It was close to home, somewhere that he could feel safe and have people around him that were willing to help him. And he thought this would really start kicking off his basketball career again. And he really did seem to flourish in this environment. He was just such a homebody, and he was so attached to his family that just having them there allowed him to, become a better person and do better just in general. And every game he played, both teams always said afterwards that he was amazing, and they were astounded at his skill. NBA scouts started coming to games, and Rico again felt close to his goal. Weeks after leading his team directly to a state title, Rico signed a letter of intent to attend Rhode Island to play for Jim. So it felt like he finally achieved his goal. But one thing he also did was stopped attending his psychology class, which he would then fail, and because of the rules for players, he was yet again ineligible to play for Rhode Island. At this point, many people were wondering if Rico was just purposely, creating these great situations and then getting scared and backing out. He, wasn't doing great in high school, but then he really flourished. And then, he wasn't doing great being away from family in Arizona State. And so he left, and then he really flourished. And then he almost made it to his goal of Rhode Island, and then he just kind of dropped out of it. A lot of people thought he purposely stopped taking the psychology class to make sure he was ineligible so that he could stay with his family, because his family lived in California, and he would be going across the country to play for Rhode Island, and a lot of people didn't think he was okay with that. But he proved a lot of people wrong when he decided to look at a bunch of other colleges. He looked somewhere in Chicago, and he told people that he had just learned a very difficult lesson in Arizona. And despite the fact that he did want to play for Rhode Island, he knew what he needed this time, he knew what he wanted, and he wasn't in any sort of rush. In the end, he did end up going back to LA City College. He didn't go to Rhode Island, he didn't go anywhere in Chicago, he didn't go to any other school that was interested in him. He just remained close to home. And unfortunately, instead of keeping his eye on the prize, he started partying heavily with his brother, but nobody would even notice. Rico would stay up all night long, heavily drinking, not sleep at all, and then without any sleep, he would go and play a game and still score 30+ goals. But things eventually did start going downhill, and he became a disruptive influence to the team. At one point, he was suspended for 6 games. The alcohol was really starting to catch up with him and his ability, and it was affecting his mood, the way he was treating people, the way he was playing. It got so bad his teammates wouldn't even pass him the ball anymore, and his drinking just kept increasing. Instead of backing away from it and taking himself to a better place, things just got worse, and he also started isolating himself from everybody. But he still stuck to his goal of eventually wanting to be in the NBA, and despite acting the way he was in this team, he still put his name into the NBA draft 2 times, but unfortunately, neither time was his name picked. It just seemed like 4 steps forward, 10 steps back, 6 steps forward, 20 steps back every single time, and it was just continuous blows to his self-esteem and hard work that he had put into everything. And so all the issues and things he was doing to cope, like drinking, just kept on getting worse. So after he had such a difficult experience with his team at LA City, he decided to call the coach at Cal State Northridge, which was another college, and to his delight, he found out that they did have a spot for him. So many people became concerned when it came to him going to Cal State Northridge. It was a much smaller school, and a lot of people believed he was almost completely compromising any chance that he would have at getting into the NBA. Others were worried that he was just going to pose a threat to the team again. As we saw before, he was doing great until he started drinking, and then his, skills and ability and you know, teamwork and ethic, all that just kind of got discombobulated and the team just fell apart. Many people came in and said they believed in him, and he said he believed in himself, and people were cheering him on and hoping for the best, but unfortunately, he ran into more issues just after the season started. Rico began drinking heavily again. I have heard that it's possibly because of a situation he had with his father, which, you know, would send him in a state of distress. But all of his anger and emotions that had been pent up towards the different situations with schools and the different situations with his family and the NBA and his own personal struggles, they came out full force. Rico verbally argued with his teammates and with his coaches. He was suspended twice for violating team rules. After one season, Rico left Northridge and he would never play college basketball again. Now, I want to stop right here because I know that a lot of what I've said sounds very negative and like he was, you know, really practicing self-destructive behavior, which I agree he was. However, what I feel like a lot of people have really failed to notice is that this was likely caused from childhood trauma. His father was said to have been physically and mentally abusive. He had to put away almost all of his own self-care to make sure that his siblings were okay and to take care of them. And when you grow up like that, you grow up very differently. Mentally, you're very, very different and you struggle with a lot and you want to please people, but at the same time, male characters in any way, shape, or form kind of immediately seem like a threat. It's just this deep trauma that I think he had from his childhood, and every time he almost met a goal, he was scared. He was scared to abandon his family. I'm sure he was scared that it would seem like he was like his father, you know, abandoning the family. I'm sure that a lot of these coaches he saw as these male figures and he got angry, you know. It seemed great until maybe they did one thing that triggered him into remembering about his dad, and just like that, you can flip like a switch. So in the spring of 2000, Rico ended up joining the Harlem Globetrotters, and while it's not exactly the NBA, which was his end goal, the Harlem Globetrotters were very, very well known, and his special skills were a perfect pair for their shows. And he seemed to finally have found a place where, you know, he belonged and he didn't feel pressured constantly. But unfortunately, only a month after joining, Rico was driving out in Los Angeles when he started having an altercation with someone, and he decided to get out of his car and confront this person. But even though he was 6'9" and at this point over 300 pounds, he somehow had someone come up behind him and hit him in his head with a bat. Now, it didn't seem like a large injury at first. He was able to successfully get back in his car and drive himself home, but as time went on, he started having very severe headaches and a lot of issues with his balance. And obviously, those are two things that you can't struggle with when you are an athlete, so he had no choice but to quit the Harlem Globetrotters, which was the only place so far where he felt at home. And at only 23 years old, after years and years and desperate attempts at achieving his basketball dream, his career was completely over. As I said before, this was a massive blow. He had spent his entire life working so hard. He had promised his mother at 5, after his father basically abandoned the family and gave the family no choice but to flee from him. He promised her he would take care of her. He promised his siblings he would take care of them. And he spent his entire life trying to cope with this trauma from his father and never being enough for his father and never having that sort of recognition from him. And he was trying to balance that with successfully creating this career while feeling pressured to do it because of a promise he had made and because of his deep need to take care of his family. And it's just like those two things together just created this ticking time bomb. And now that basketball, his one thing, the one positive goal he'd had his entire life was gone, he really, really spun out of control. Rico returned to his mother in Alhambra and he had no job and no plans. He had spent his entire life planning for basketball, and the only thing he had left to go to pretty much was drinking. His mother was desperately trying to piece the family back together. I'm pretty sure all of the siblings at this point were back in the home. But what no one really realized is that in the last few years, Rico had gotten deeper into his addictions when he started to include heroin, meth, and crack. And the reason why he used them just kind of, again, shows you his personality and how desperately he was kind of battling within himself. So Rico had used all of these drugs as a tool to literally stay on the basketball court for hours. He had always spent his entire high school career making fun of his friends who smoked marijuana, saying that they were ruining their lives, that he could never do that, he had to use his lungs for basketball. But when he got to a point where he felt so desperate to achieve his goal, or he felt like he was letting everybody down, he started using all these insane drugs, and also he could practice. They said he would use these drugs and just go for 24 hours and just play and practice over and over and over again. He would shoot over and over and over again and practice one move for hours at a time, thinking that if he perfected these things, his chance would get bigger. But unfortunately, when you use these drugs for practicing basketball for your goal, if the basketball goes away, if that dream is gone, you're still left with your addiction to these drugs. Rico spent majority of the 2000s unable to overcome any of his addictions. He was arrested multiple times and he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but he refused to take the medication because of how it made him feel. Even after being thrown in jail multiple times, he would come out and return straight to drinking. And then one time he was thrown in jail, he saw someone there with him that he did not expect to see. Rico saw his father, and this hit him very, very hard. And pretty much right after being released, Rico overdosed on prescription pills. It wasn't until that overdose in 2007 that Rico finally decided to enter a rehab facility in Los Angeles to try to overcome the addictions that had taken over his life. He was done with them. And Rico did it. He successfully completed the program and he ended up moving in with another graduate of the program, and he also got a job as a security guard. This was massive for him because he hadn't really had a job. He hadn't really thought about anything past basketball other than drugs, and now that he was out of it, it felt like this fresh, clean start, and things would only get better for him. After a while of working as a security guard, he ended up meeting a lady friend named Jennifer Song, and again, he kind of focused a lot on basketball, hadn't focused much on his future, and he always told everybody that he didn't want kids. He, didn't want to possibly end up like his dad. He didn't want this, he didn't want that, but Jennifer seemed to change all that for him. And Jennifer was a really solid woman. She was from Seattle. She owned her own business. I think she was an insurance broker. She had her own house. She was very, very stable, and that's exactly what Rico needed at that moment. And it kind of made him challenge himself to become better as a person. And by 2012, they were taking weekend visits back and forth to each other's homes, his in LA and hers in Seattle. And by 2014, they were talking about marriage and they were picking out names for their children. He had planned everything around basketball, and he thought he had lost everything when he lost basketball. But now he had a new opportunity and a new purpose in life, which was to be a husband and then eventually a father. However, as great as this was, Rico started suffering from relapses again. And it's nothing huge. I don't want you to picture him, going and doing heroin. He, for the most part, just, messed up and had too many drinks one night. And because of this, he ended up losing his job as a security guard. And this was obviously devastating for him. This made him feel like it was yet another failure. But to kind of keep his life going in the right direction, he decided, as well as Jennifer, that the best option would be for him to move in with her. So Rico moved into the house with Jennifer, but living long distance and living together can be very, very different, and a few issues arose. As we've talked about in this entire video, Rico was very used to being the provider and the caretaker. For the first time ever, Rico had a partner, and the partner was the one who was providing and, you know, was the successful one, and he just felt off. This was foreign for him. And we already know he had a huge issue being that far away from his family. He had this constant need to be near them, almost like he felt like something would go wrong if he left them. And so this started eating away at him, and he refused to unpack any of his boxes. But because of this anxiety and this stress and this pressure he was putting on himself, Rico started backpedaling and was acting unlike himself, and Jennifer knew something was wrong. So she really started laying into him one day. It was like, what is going on? You have to tell me. If we're going to be together and live together, we have to work together. And this is when Rico confessed that he had relapsed again. But as they always did, they promised to work through it together, take it one day at a time, and they promised to be there for each other. Things started going in a positive direction yet again, and Rico actually got a job interview to be a manager, a property manager, and this seemed to totally snap his mood into a better place. Jennifer said she came home one day and Rico had unpacked every single one of his boxes, which seemed like this giant stepping stone in the right direction for him. But before he 100% set in stone decided to move to Seattle, Rico felt the need to visit his mother one more time, except he didn't tell anyone that's what he was going to do. On Wednesday, October 8th, 2014, Jennifer set off to the gym, and at this point, separation anxiety, Rico usually went everywhere with Jennifer, and she told him she was going, asked him if he wanted to go, and he said that instead he wanted to go and explore his new home of Seattle, that he maybe wanted to go to a lake or just kind of see what was around, because again, at this point, he really just followed her wherever she went, and she thought this was great. You know, he'd unpacked his boxes, now he wants to explore. She thought they were moving in the right direction. So off she went, and off Rico went to explore Seattle. When Jennifer got back from the gym, Rico was nowhere inside their home, and she figured he was maybe just out exploring, so she waited a little while and then she called him. And to her surprise, he was on his way from Seattle all the way to LA. Jennifer believes that he wanted to talk to his mom to have a little bit of closure from his past, something that, as I've said, he struggled most of his life with, and to really get her approval when it came to his relationship with Jennifer and to really get her trust. He seemed happy along this drive. He talked to a few friends on the phone while driving and said that he couldn't wait to marry Jennifer and have children and all these great, happy, positive things. But the trip when he reached his mom's house was explained a little bit differently. Rico arrived at his mother's house on the 9th of October, and his mother said that she couldn't for the life of her figure out why he was there. She said that he got there, said he wanted to grab some clothes, talk to them for a bit. You know, he was apparently packing up some of his clothes into a bag, and she was sitting in a chair in the same room, kind of like waiting for him to say something like, hey, I'm here because of this, or I want to tell you this. And she said it was just this awkward tension where, you know, she would look up and he would like look at her out of the corner of his eyes, and it just seemed like there was something on his mind and he wouldn't really give it up. He also sat down with his stepfather, and he told his stepfather that he wasn't sure if moving to Seattle was the right decision, and this is pretty much the entire trip. He also spoke to his mom about his relapse, and she told him, you know, he needed to get himself together and figure it out and overcome it. It was just a very strange trip, but no one really knew why he was there, and even Jennifer herself said that she didn't believe the trip went originally as he had planned because of how he acted towards her afterwards. So maybe he went on this trip to tell his mom something or to make a decision, and he just couldn't bring himself to do it, and maybe he was disappointed in himself, or maybe someone in the house, his mother, his stepfather, his siblings, said something to him, a response maybe he didn't want to get, and this really got to him. But either way, no one was really able to figure out his true intentions of the trip. Rico had his meeting, his interview for this new job in the next couple of days, and he planned to be back in Seattle by 7 p.m. on October 10th. At this point, he had been awake for almost 40 hours straight, and his mom and Jennifer were both begging him to take a short nap at his mother's home and then leave after a couple of hours of sleep so he could successfully make the rest of the trip home. But Rico seemed to be on a very, very different schedule. Just after midnight on October the 10th, Rico left his mother's home to head back to Seattle without taking the short nap that he told his mother and his girlfriend that he would take. Rico told both his mother and Jennifer over the phone that he had left, so I find it odd that he never said goodbye to his mom in person, but they were both shocked that he had already left and didn't understand why he was in such a rush, but he insisted that he just really wanted to get back for this interview. But his mother said on the phone he sounded completely out of sorts. Rico headed north on Interstate 5 and he stopped in Lodi to get gas, and at around 8 a.m. when Jennifer woke up, she immediately called Rico. And he was fine, he was still making his way. I'm pretty sure he was north of Sacramento, and he told her that he really wanted to go into the mountains and get some sleep. Now, this sounded odd to her, but she obviously said, you know, this isn't the safest idea. I don't think you should go into the mountains by yourself. I think you should go to a rest stop if you do want to sleep. And he agreed and continued on his drive as normal, except for one reason or another, he stopped responding to anyone's text messages and calls for the next few hours. Jennifer kept calling him just to be updated, make sure he was on his way home, make sure he was okay, ask about the trip to his mom's house, and his mom called him to try to figure out why he left without saying anything really, and, you know, making sure he was okay yet again, because at this point it was well over 40 hours that he had been awake. But still, Rico wouldn't answer, and everyone just kind of blew it off at first. You know, maybe he did take a nap, or maybe he was driving and they obviously didn't want to disturb him while he was driving. Then randomly at 10:44 a.m. on October 10th, a few hours after he talked to Jennifer, Rico sent a text message. He didn't call her back, but he texted her back, and all he said was that he was fine. Rico would never text or call anyone again, and he also never showed up to their home in Seattle. Jennifer sat waiting all day long, and Margaret also sat waiting all day long for a confirmation that Rico had safely made it home. At around 8 p.m. when Rico still had not come home and Jennifer still had not heard from him, Jennifer called Margaret to see if she knew anything. Margaret also had not heard from Rico, and they both kind of decided it might be best to just give him some time. This was huge for him. This move to Seattle, he just kind of said his last farewell to his family, packed up his last few things. Things were permanent now. You know, he had changed his ID to a Washington State ID. He had done all these things. He had this massive interview for this first real job coming up, and we know how reserved and shy and family-driven Rico is, and this probably scared the piss out of him. And when he was in situations where he was uncomfortable or really struggling with something, he would just go drive to random places. He was never one to really say no to a long drive. He enjoyed it, and it helped clear his mind. So they thought, you know, maybe he just went out to really soak all of this in before returning to Seattle as his permanent home. However, by October 14th, nobody had heard from Rico, and he had never showed up to his job interview. No one could reach his phone. He had just vanished at this point. So on the same day, October the 14th, when everyone started realizing maybe something is wrong, you know, maybe he got into a car accident, you know, thinking the absolute worst, a Yolo County sheriff was patrolling California State Route 16 north of Ramsey, and he found a black Nissan Maxima at a rest stop parking lot in the mountains. And the Maxima was not parked in a parking spot, it was just kind of pulled over to the side. And he had seen it the day before and didn't think much of it. This was a popular place for people to go and kind of look around and hike and maybe sleep in the car. There was a creek nearby. But on this particular day, the 14th, it was there for a second day in a row. And this is when he decided to investigate. When the officer went over to this black Nissan Maxima, he looked in the windows, and there were CDs everywhere. There was paper absolutely everywhere. It looked like there were credit cards laying around the car. It appeared as if this car had been totally ransacked. So thinking that this more than likely was a stolen vehicle, he ran the plates. The car did not pop up as stolen. So this officer decided to contact Alhambra Police Department to figure out who this car belonged to. And that's when they found out that this car belonged to Rico. Now at this point, Rico wasn't considered a missing person. They didn't think anything suspicious. The car might have been stolen. Maybe someone hadn't reported it. So authorities went to Rico's mother's house to ask her if she knew why his car was there. And this is when pieces clicked together that something horrible happened. When the car was found, it was out of gas and the battery was dead, indicating that he had either just driven it around for an odd amount of time to totally run the gas out, or just sat with the car running. He had filled up gas in Lodi, as I said, and he should have had 13 gallons of gas left when he reached this parking lot. So somehow he managed to burn these 13 gallons of gas and kill his car battery. As I said, credit cards, papers, CDs, things were tossed around the entire car, but he had taken his phone and his driver's license and a backpack that he always carried with him. So a search immediately started in Cache Creek, which was right beside where his car was found, and it was kind of like a canyon style creek. And they used all-terrain vehicles, they used helicopters, they used an airplane with thermogenic cameras, they used search dogs. A 5-mile radius area search surrounding the parking lot was done, and they did find some interesting things, because originally they weren't sure if Rico was the one to drive the car there himself, because if Rico had, either someone would have had to pick him up or he was somewhere in the area, and so far they had found nothing of him, because the nearest gas station was 30 miles away from this parking lot. So if Rico was by himself, he was somewhere in the area. He couldn't have possibly gone far. And then they ended up finding size 18 footprints leading from the car down to Cache Creek, and they also found an insole from one of his shoes, which I find kind of odd. I'm not sure why his insole would have ended up outside of his shoe. If you guys have any ideas on that, leave them down below. But at this point, they knew he had been there. Size 18 is huge, you know. He was a big guy, 6'9", and I think 320 pounds at the time that he went missing. You know, where did he go? How could someone this large just vanish 30 miles away from any sort of gas station or public area? When the footprints and the insole were the only things found in this search, they decided to check the pings on Rico's phone and found even more confusing information. Rico's phone had been pinging in Redwood Valley, which was 70 miles away from this parking lot. So how did Rico get from this parking lot without his car 70 miles away? The detective decided to ask the public for help, and 4,000 emails and text messages were sent through the reverse 911 system to ask people if they had seen Rico. Again, how hard could it be to remember a 6'9" black male that weighed over 300 pounds? And sure enough, a few people called in claiming to have seen Rico. One person claimed to have seen Rico walking on October 12th along the road within a mile of the parking lot, so that's 2 days after he stopped contacting everybody. So was he just hanging out in this area for 2 days? Another person claimed to have seen Rico sitting on the guardrail in the same general area, just kind of looking out to the sky. And then a family called in and basically explained why Rico's phone was pinging 70 miles away. So apparently a grandma and a grandpa were driving with their grandson through the area, and their grandson noticed a backpack leaning up against a guardrail, and they decided to pull over. They checked the backpack for any sort of identification, and they found nothing, so they took that and the backpack back to their home 70 miles away. So at first they were thinking maybe Rico got a ride somewhere and went 70 miles to Redwood Valley, but he did not. This family just had his phone, but this also meant they now had more of Rico's belongings and locations of where these things were found. And the backpack was found just 1,500 feet away from where the person claimed to have seen him sitting on the guardrail. So all these different people were seeing him. days after he stopped contacting everybody, and somehow he left his belongings behind. They were hoping maybe the phone and the backpack could give them some clues, and there were jumper cables in the backpack. So they wondered if maybe Rico had gone to get help, ended up staying in the city for a couple of days. And they looked through his phone as well and found some pictures and videos that, to me, make the story a little more confusing, but I guess we'll see what you guys think about it. So there were quite a few selfies that he had taken the night of the 10th. So hours after he decided to, ignore everybody, he did have his phone, and his phone was charged because he was taking pictures of himself, funny pictures by the Welcome to Yolo County sign. He took some pictures of the creek and some pictures of the sky. So he was using his phone. He was just choosing to not contact anyone for some reason. They also found a video on the phone that looked like it had been taken accidentally, and the phone was sitting on the center console of the car, and it was Rico singing along, happy as can be, to music. But he, at the same time, was throwing CDs all around his car. He was ripping up papers, just throwing things everywhere. So while authorities initially thought someone ransacked his car, Rico did all of that himself. Just seemed to create this more confusing picture of, he disappeared, he stopped responding to people at almost 11 a.m. the day of the 10th, but then hours later he was happy and smiling for selfies and, jamming to music in his car. It just didn't make a lot of sense.
Developing news tonight, a former member of the Harlem Globetrotters has vanished. Rico Harris disappeared on a road trip to Seattle. He left his mother's home in Alhambra 10 days ago to drive to Seattle to see his girlfriend.
His car was found 3 days later abandoned in Yolo County in Northern California. CBS 2's Lori Perez is live in Alhambra, where she just spoke to his family. Lori.
Yes, and it has been a very long 10 days for Harris's family as they wonder where he is and worry whether he's okay. As you said, he left his mom's home here in Alhambra on October 10th. He was headed back to Seattle, where his mom says he had recently relocated to start a new sales job and to live near his girlfriend. But the 37-year-old has not been heard from since he called his mom that morning and left a message for his girlfriend that same day.
Then on October 19th, days after the search had started and ended, authorities get a call from a man. So this is days. He was last spoken to on the 10th. On the 19th, a man at 5:30 a.m. saw someone resembling Rico walking around the spot where Rico had left his car. And this man seemed confused and like he was searching for something and irritated. Authorities wondered if Rico had come back to get his car, but they had already towed it off and he was a missing person and might not have even known it. Or maybe he just didn't care. Authorities went back the very next day to try to find any more evidence that Rico had been back, and they did in fact find another set of size 18 footprints around the area that this man claimed to have seen Rico. So the exact same size, the exact same footprints that they found before. So this confirmed to them that Rico had been back. And they also decided to bring dogs out again, thinking maybe he had gotten lost and couldn't find his way back. The area that this creek and canyon and parking lot were in was pretty treacherous. A lot of people would go hiking there, but it was very easy to get hurt. There are wild animals. There's just no telling. You could fall into the creek and get pulled away or fall into a very deep part. And interestingly enough, the dogs did start alerting a little bit to this one deeper part in the creek. So authorities decided to bring in a dive team, but nothing was found. Imagine how frustrating it would be to know that the person you're looking for was on their phone taking pictures of themselves while you were trying to desperately get in contact with them. Imagine searching for this person and then just days later the person coming back to the location and no one knew why, and he wasn't getting in contact with anyone. And no one knew what his plan was next. Authorities searched so meticulously and so much area after this last sighting of Rico that they were confident that if something had happened to him, that if he had somehow walked back to this location and then had no ride back, they would have found him. You know, if he had fallen victim of the elements or of an animal attack, they would have found him. He either walked off on his own to head towards a town or someone drove him away. By October 22nd, the sheriffs completely scaled back their search, and they did bring in divers once more in November, but still nothing was found. It was absolutely baffling, the lead detectives and everyone that knew Rico, because as I said, he loved his family. He loved and needed his family, and he would go off on these time periods where he needed to clear his head, but he was never gone for an extended period of time because his whole life, his pattern of behavior didn't make him capable of doing that. So the fact that he somehow managed to vanish 30 miles away from any sort of real civilization, and you know, he successfully did that and wasn't found, was so confusing. He clearly had been wandering the area and the surrounding area for over a week. But what was he doing, and how on earth was he doing it? The detective on the case very quickly ruled out foul play, but said the longer that this case remains unsolved, the more likely it is that something happened to him. Photos found on his phone suggested that Rico willingly went to Yolo County alone, and there was no evidence of a struggle by his car. The backpack and items of his that they found, they didn't appear to have been forcibly taken. It's like he just slowly started dropping things of himself off and then just disappeared. Some people theorize that he left his phone in his backpack so they couldn't track him. I'm going to get into theories in just a second, but I cannot wait to see what you guys come up with this week for, you know, sharing your ideas and the different theories that you have. You guys left amazing theories last week and ideas that totally blew my mind, and you guys think of absolutely everything. So if there's one case that I so badly want you to leave down any idea you have, it's on this case. So either Rico saw this as a perfect place to go sleep. Again, some people think he just chose this area to go off and do drugs. I'm not so sure how to feel about that. I know that the authorities did find a little bag in his car that resembles bags that are used to carry drugs in, but when it was tested, it did come back negative. I have also heard that there were 2 bottles, just like water bottles I think, that smelled of alcohol. However, I have not seen that confirmed anywhere else other than just a handful of places. So I'm not sure how true that is, but either way, he ended up in these mountains. The detective thinks that, as I said before, he didn't pull into a parking spot because he wanted to remain more hidden, which is, I think, why a lot of people are leaning towards he went up there to do drugs. He didn't want anyone to see him. He didn't want anyone to find this car. It's not like this car was hidden by any means. I obviously will have inserted a picture, but your eyes immediately go to where the parking spaces are. If you're not looking off to the sides, it's very easy to miss it. Authorities think it's very possible that he just stopped to take a nap, and after all, he'd been awake for over 40 hours, probably closer to 50 at this point, and maybe he didn't pull into a parking spot because he was just so tired. Maybe he just went in the entrance and just threw the car in park and passed out. Now, he more than likely could have been so tired that he left the car running, which would have totally burned his gas, and then once the gas went, definitely could have burned his battery. So that could explain that, and maybe he got out and tried to wander around for a ride, and while he was waiting for a car to pass by, he was taking pictures of the Welcome to Yolo County sign. This could also explain why there were jumper cables in his backpack. However, his mom doesn't necessarily agree with this. She says that she swears up and down he always has jumper cables in the back of his car. I don't know why he would put them in his backpack to walk off. I think it's very, very likely that maybe he did find a ride and, you know, got these jumper cables from someone else. Maybe he took someone else's jumper cables because that's something easy to replace, or maybe they did drive him back to the gas station 30 miles away, but at the same time, he didn't take any of his money with him, so I don't know how he would have purchased it. When it comes to the jumper cables, they just really throw me off because let's say he did find someone to give him these jumper cables. He would still need their car to jump his own car. So either way, if, you know, someone gave them to him, or if he went and bought them, someone drove him there, either way he was in contact with someone, why wouldn't this person then drop him off at his car. His book bag was found a mile away from where his car was. So what, did someone just drop him off just close enough but didn't want to go the extra mile to go help him jump his car? Or maybe he only made it a mile and decided to wait there for someone to drive by. Either way, you know, why give someone your jumper cables and not go help them jump their car? Maybe they were suspicious of him. Maybe he was intimidating. I can see that considering his size. But either way, they think maybe he put his backpack down after retrieving this, and before his walk back, maybe he walked down to the creek to get some water, and maybe he went up in a different area and couldn't remember where he put his backpack or got lost, and that's why he just didn't go get it again. Or like the other theory authorities have, maybe he just left it there to not be found. But that to me just doesn't make sense, because why go out of your way to go get jumper cables and do all this just to leave all that stuff there to not be found? Like, it just, none of it making sense. You get what I'm saying? Like, none of it makes sense. No, and then obviously Rico returned to his car and realized it was gone. I don't know, I just find it odd, because that means Rico either was driven to a town somewhere where he could get food and he could get water and he had somewhere to sleep for a week. Someone got him there. Maybe he had to find another ride and couldn't for days to get back to his car. But at this point, you know, if you were taken to where your car was and your car wasn't there anymore, you would probably say, oh crap, my car was towed, let's go back to the town, let's go back to the city. So the fact that the caller just saw him outside by himself, didn't mention any other vehicles, he was just alone walking around this area, makes you wonder if he had just been in this area the entire time. But if so, how did people not find him? Do you see what I'm saying? It's just not making sense. So basically, at this point, authorities believe that he just walked off to a new town, into a new life, to be free. Maybe everything had been weighing on him, and you know, in these pictures that he took, he looked so happy. He looked like a free man, like he had finally taken a breath of fresh air, and they believe maybe this led him to want to continue on getting a new life and totally getting rid of everything that had ever, you know, maybe weighed him down or put stress on him. I can see this giant theory being true, the different possibilities. You know, maybe he did go up there to do drugs, but yet they didn't find any evidence of that. If he had done a ton of drugs, I can see him walking around for a week outside, you know, just not knowing what's going on, if he had enough drugs. Or maybe he did go up there to sleep, and that's why the car ran out of gas and ran out of battery. You know, it's just confusing. But, you know, he had spent his whole life trying to impress someone else or take care of someone else at the expense of his own well-being. First to impress his father, that would never end up caring. And then he took care of his siblings so his mother could work and in turn take care of everyone. And he felt this deep need to take care of his mother. And then he had to impress high school coaches and college basketball teams, and he had to impress the NBA. And it was just one thing after another, and I'm sure he was putting a lot of pressure on himself to succeed in all this. And the second one small thing happened that felt like a failure, I think he just beat himself up so badly over it. You can see that he was struggling and turned to alcohol and drugs to cope, but for so long, despite this, he still continued to push on. And, you know, he still kept going different routes and trying different things to get to his end goal, but it just never worked out. And even though he had overcome his addictions, maybe he was feeling like he wasn't impressing Jennifer the way that he needed to. Maybe he still felt like he wouldn't succeed. Maybe he thought he would go to this interview, and because he had recently relapsed, he would do it again and lose this job. I'm sure there was a lot of fear of, first of all, the unfamiliarity of this new area and the unknown. And I wonder if it was just too much. Rico had put a lot of pressure on himself, and he wanted to be the best he could be, but unfortunately, because of his childhood trauma, I feel like he just couldn't escape this black hole he was in. And unfortunately, when you put so much pressure on yourself, there comes a time when you're going to break. It's like the saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, you never know what one small thing that seems so light and seems so insignificant will totally snap you. But on the flip side, we have to remember that 8 days later, Rico returned to his car. Through the entire time I was researching, the biggest thing I wondered was, if his car had been there, where would he have gone? Would he have finished his drive home? You know, I don't see someone wanting to end their life, but still wandering around for 8 days and then coming back to their car almost like, you know, maybe he was just needing that time to process something, and then when he got to his car, it was gone. Maybe that was just, like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back. I just really wish that car was still there and he could have been able to make the decision he wanted to go where he wanted to. Either way, my heart hurts for those that loved him and struggled through life together with him. His life was so far from easy, but he did have people that loved him so deeply and believed in him despite the little hiccups that he came and struggled with his entire life. With someone like Rico, he would literally run himself into the ground to help the people that he loved, and he would have done it with a smile on his face. Whether that meant that he had to take drugs to stay up for hours and days at a time to hopefully get into the NBA to finally take care of his family, you know, whether that meant that he had to fail at one school and try at multiple others to hopefully overcome this, you know, it sounds so bad to some people, and so many people judge him so badly for his addictions and the things he struggled with, but we're all different and we all cope with things differently, and I think he honestly believed he was doing good. I think he was just so desperate to change things for his family and his own life, and it just led down the wrong path. His mother is still desperately searching for him, and Jennifer and his mother still talk to each other every single day on the phone, and they are both just begging for him to come home. So if you guys have any sort of information, I have his picture at this point posted everywhere on this video. Please remember that I have all of the links down below to where you can get in contact with the proper authorities. Definitely keep your eye out. Any small tip can honestly change absolutely everything. I know a lot of you are from California, so this could also be a huge benefiting factor in this video. So please don't forget to keep telling this story. Share this video, share his story, tell people that you can, because this could be one of those situations where he is out there somewhere. He's just so far away and it's been so long and it's not talked about anymore that people might just not know, you know. There's absolutely no telling, and with how shy he is and reserved he is, it's very likely that he has just kept to himself and managed to stay under the radar. There's really just no telling, so keep an eye out, share this as much as you can. Exposure is absolutely everything when it comes to cases where the missing person could be out there. There are times where people have been gone for 20 years and they pop up out of nowhere, so keep his family in your thoughts, keep everyone who loved him in your thoughts, and hope for the absolute best for this family. I thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to listen to Rico's story, and thank you for any positive comments you leave down below and ideas and theories, because you guys could shed a lot of light onto this that people might not have thought before. You know, putting so many minds together and so many different perspectives can lead to massive breakthroughs. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this channel and hopefully helping to aid in some of these missing persons cases. So don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Hallan fam. So hopefully we can bring them home together, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!
We don't want to think about the worst, so right now I'm keep myself very optimistic. I'm not really letting my mind wander anywhere else. It's an ongoing investigation, so I'm very hopeful.
I feel that confident that we're going to find him, you know, that he's going to come through wherever he is. You know, I have to believe that. You know, I have that kind of faith that, you know, we're going to find him.